Acceptance criteria versus definition of done. They are not the same.
Taking trips, cause I never tripped on what they said. If you speaking from your heart, naysayers gon' aim for your head.
Hey everyone, it's Mark from WIPMX.com. Today I would like to discuss the difference between acceptance criteria and the definition of done. Now, when developing your acceptance criteria, from my experience, there are three areas to consider: user input, user action, process, and outcome or results. Now, in web development, your typical user input or user action will stem from clicking of a button or entering text information or a value. This input or action will start a process. And what is a process? It basically determines what action to take based upon the input provided by the user. That output will be your outcome or result. An example of this would be, imagine you're logging into your online banking account. You enter your username and password, you click submit. If your credentials are correct, you gain access to your account. If your username is incorrect, you get bad username. If your password is incorrect, you get bad password. Let's say you enter no information and you click submit. You may get a completely different error. And then finally, after enough failed attempts, you may find your account locked. So that's just an example of acceptance criteria that will be unique to a particular user story. In this case, it's you want to access your account. Now let's take a closer look at definition of done. So from my experience, your definition of done is usually made up of three areas, which are peer review, test and QA, and accepted by the product owner. Now again, these are not story specific, but they apply to every story. So let's just dive a bit deeper into that. Your peer review. Prior to the actual review, you have preparation. Now, best practice is that any code scheduled for review must be completed and tested by the developer and in the developer's view, ready to be reviewed. The code and other impacted project materials such as documentation should also be made available to those conducting the review. And those people that are conducting the review should have already gone over the material prior to the review so that they can actually share their findings, and the review can be used to discuss findings rather than used to actually identify problems and then have to have a follow-up call in which you could dive deeper and try and problem solve. So again, review all the materials prior to the review, so at the review you're actually discussing whatever it is you found as one of the people conducting the review. During the actual review, reviews are conducted as needed. You don't need to review every piece of code that's coming out, but you do need to review some code. The frequency of individual participation in the peer review really depends primarily on the size of your team. So if you have a small team, 2, 3, 4 developers, you can probably include them in every review. If you have larger teams, and I would say 5, 7, 10 people, then you need to rotate that participation based on skill level, experience, and availability. But again, that's really all depends on your environment. So, and then finally we had the follow-up. One of the many purposes of the follow-up, outside of rehashing what was reviewed and steps taken and progress and what was done, is it also provides motivation to continue to conduct reviews, because teams can see the value from the review and the follow-up, and again, it just provides more motivation to continue to adhere to this approach. Test and QA, pretty self-explanatory. We're all doing testing. We all do QA. One of the things to remember is that testing and quality assurance will ensure that the product meets the identified requirements of the customer. Again, this is just something that you should already be doing. The testing and QA, while itself will be unique to each story, the fact that you're doing it still can be used as an umbrella term, and that's why it falls under definition of done. And then finally, accepted by the product owner. As I mentioned before, no user story or tasks that make up the user story should be demoed until it's been accepted by the product owner. The product owner represents the customer, or if everything's internal, the business unit. The product owner should be the one most familiar with the requirements, and it's the product owner's responsibility to say, this is fit for purpose, we can demo this. So to summarize, acceptance criteria is created during sprint planning sessions. It's during your sprint planning session, that Monday, that first day of the sprint, that you're having your session. You've got your product backlog, and you're going to determine the scope of work for this next sprint. So you're grabbing at items, user stories, and tasks from the product backlog, putting them in your sprint backlog, and this is when you determine what the acceptance criteria will be for these particular stories. Make sense? Okay. And the key thing to remember about acceptance criteria is that it is unique to each story, not only just the story, but the tasks that make up the story. So if you saw my other video, you saw how I broke out how a particular user story may have 4, 5, 6 pieces of acceptance criteria. So again, it is unique to each user story. Whereas definition of done, again, in my experience, determined at the start of the project. These are the things we're going to do. Everything's going to be peer reviewed. Everything's going to go through test and QA. Everything's going to have to be signed off by the product owner. So while all of these things happen to the user stories, it is not story specific. And that's pretty much it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it informative and helpful. If you have any questions or feedback, please leave comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. And remember, for project managers, we deliver. Thank you for your time.